Hi, hello, good morning, all parents and students. This morning we'll be looking at this webinar on preparing our students and children for primary one of a primary school. Just to introduce myself, I'm teacher Weilun here. I'm the academic director here at MyStretcher. And for those of you who have not been at MyStretcher previously, also to let you all know a bit about MyStretcher, MyStretcher actually is a tuition and enrichment center here in Singapore, right, where we cater for after school tuition and also in terms of enrichment services for students across the pre-primary, the primary, and also the secondary level. At the same time, we also operate, student care related center services, right, through our MySparks program in Singapore, where we provide after-school, student care programs for students too. Looking at this today, right, I think a few things that we are going to cover before we go into the slides proper is that, as our students, as our children go into primary school, it is going to be a time of transition, right? So there's going to be a lot of different challenges, different experiences for them. And as parents and as teachers, we also recognize the kind of adaptation, the kind of transition they have to make. So really what we are going to focus on today is really a few key things. So what we are going to do is I'm going to share with you a bit, especially for the younger parents here, right? How things have changed within the primary school system itself, right? Because if you look at it during our time and now, actually there has been a lot of changes within the Singapore's primary education system. And what does that mean in terms of the experience for our students and our children as they enter into primary one, right? So that's the first part. The second part itself is also with regards to, given these changes, what are the skills, what are the qualities that would continue to be important to equip our students with as they go into primary school to ensure that they are able to adapt comfortably, right? They are able to thrive within this new environment. And thirdly, they are able to progress, they're able to grow well within this primary school setting as well, right? So these are the three things here. And finally, we also provide some tips in terms of how we can work together with our children, right, to actually help them in terms of easing into this new environment too. Okay, so with that, I'm going to share my slides now. Okay, so you all should be able to see the slide on screen. Okay, so let me just toggle over to the slideshow. Okay, yeah. So as mentioned, right, today we are going to look at a few key things. And to keep it interactive, anytime that you all have any questions, feel free to also type them in the chat and we'll be happy to take them live as well, right? And you can see over here, right, a few things. Number one, how has the primary education landscape evolved? And from there, what are some of these, requirements across the different subjects? And what are the skills that are needed for our students to thrive from P1 to P3? And given that, what are some of the practical tips that you all can use in terms of building that earlier rather than later, I would say? Because you will see now, actually, if you look at primary school, as we work with our students as well, be it at the lower primary, middle primary, or upper primary level, you will see that one key thing that we always come back to is the need to build the foundation early. And there is this idea of a spiral concept, right, in education in Singapore, where essentially what you learn from a younger age will build up, right, as you go into the middle and upper primary. So if I give you an example, right, for example, in mathematics. So in mathematics, you will see that, one of the very key first things that the students or the children will learn is actually the topic on whole numbers. And then after that is the topic on fractions. So you will see that, these topics are pretty foundational, pretty fundamental. But the thing is that they will continue to be exposed to that, throughout their whole primary school life. So as they go on to middle primary and as they go on to upper primary, they will continue to be exposed to these topics, but it will be increased in complexity, right? And you can see that a lot of the students who struggle with these topics is because they didn't really build that right foundation from young, right? That means when they were at the lower primary level, or as they entered into primary and they were first, exposed to this particular topic, they didn't really learn that well. So you see a lot of the, errors that come through, be it in terms of careless mistakes when they calculate, or be it in terms of, the way they draw the model is not correct. right, it carries over into middle and primary, right, upper primary. And by then it becomes a bit harder for the teacher. The teacher can still help to fix and remediate some of that, but it just becomes harder because you also see by that time some of these be it in terms of the problem solving strategies also become more complicated. So there's less time to go back to the fundamentals anymore, right? So in short, it's really the idea of a spiral that the topics build on each other, right, with increasing complexity. And therefore, it's very important that, in terms of some of these foundational skills, we need to build them from, early rather than later, right? So that's really the first portion here, okay? Yeah. So with that, okay, uh, maybe just also as a show of hand, just to understand the crowd today, right? In terms of the current educational level of your child, right? So maybe if I could ask, right? So I think there could be a mix here. So some of us, it could be still at the playgroup level, or some could be at K1, K2. And then there's some that is primary one and primary two. Maybe as you are just entering the primary school, you may have wanted to know a bit more about some things to note. So perhaps just as a show of your virtual hand, right? So how many of you have children who are now in K1, right? Maybe in K1 you can raise your hand, right? K1, okay. Okay, thanks for that. Okay. Right. So I think there's a couple. Okay. What about K2? So K2. So K2, are there any in K2? Oh, K2, there's quite a number more, right? So K2, actually, I think that would really be the boundary, right? So between, right now and going into primary school. So I think this will be the batch that is most really, most directly impacted as you go in next year, right? To see what's going to happen there. What about, are there any who are already in primary school? So right now, your child is already in primary one or even in primary two. That means in the lower primary. Okay, so that one a bit less so. So I think the bulk of it is really the K1 and the K2 group. Yeah, so thanks for that, right? So indeed, right, I would say that this group here is definitely the group that is most direct in terms of that transition, right, to the primary school system next year. And what can you look forward to in terms of the changes? That's where I will start with the first part. A bit more on that. And generally, I want to just highlight to everybody here as well, especially for the first time parents. Why? Because as first time parents, you would not have then been exposed to this, right? Other than when if you have elder siblings and all that as well, because these are things that compared to during our time, right, when we were in the system, things have pretty much changed quite a bit. So what are the things that have changed? I'm going to take this chance to also just provide a brief overview of that so that you are aware and what that means for your child as well. So really the first part itself is I think you all will be aware in terms of the reduction of the school-based assessment, which is a positive and welcome development, where you see that essentially in terms of particularly as you enter into lower primary levels, the removal of midterms for all levels. So actually right now if you enter into schools, there's no more midterms, right, across the levels. But what has replaced that across most of the levels is this idea of a weighted assessment, or what we call as a WA in school. Last time, if you remember in school during our time, you all will be very familiar with the concept of CA1, SA1, CA2, and SA2, correct? So right now, it's not really that anymore. In place of that, it has been replaced with a weighted assessment concept, where there are more of these bite-sized tests that the students take that then contribute to their overall score. But even that is more at the middle and upper primary level. So in a sense, if you look at P1 and P2, even for P1 and P2, the WAs are not graded if there's any, right? So the idea is that, for any kind of assessment at P1 and P2 level, there are no graded assessment. So anything that they do, in a sense, is a non-graded assessment. So why are they doing this? Is because if you look at it this way, the idea behind that, and you can see the timeline here, right, is to really remove that stress factor for students, right? And the idea that, when you have too many tests in a year, it can become a bit stressful, right? Especially if there's a stake involved, right? And some people or some parents may feel that it's high stake if it contributes like or end of year score and all that. So the idea is to really remove that, particularly at a younger age, where you can see that for the P1 and P2 is a more formative age. That's how we would think about it. That they're just starting to adapt. They're just starting to get used to this new environment. So perhaps it's really less of settling them with all these stress and this burden, but really giving them that chance to, inspire their joy for learning and really to explore all the interests that they have. So it's really coming from that perspective. And going beyond that also is what the education system or MOE now really consider as an emphasis on holistic learning, right? And I think recently if you also look at the news and everything, there's also a lot of talk about exams and how it should not be like a arms race, right? I think there were like some of these words that were raised, so it should not be an arms race. It should move away from that, and that's essentially how you can see the direction of where these developments are going. So that is what you see. So in short, for P1 and P2, there is a removal of these exams, and even if there's any assessment, it's not in the form of a graded assessment, right? The thing is, you can see in a sense also there can be double-edged sword in that, right? And what does that mean? So I would say that actually for some of the students, right, that we work with as well. So myself, we have also worked with students across different levels. So I've worked with students at the upper primary level. I have also worked with students at the lower primary level. And you will see that sometimes what happens as a result of this development is students become very averse to any experience or any semblance of test taking. So for example, here, like even at my stretcher, sometimes we do give like, not a big test, but more of these like little bite-sized quiz in class, right? Just to see where their understanding is and everything. And you can see that actually the lower primary students are a bit more averse to that. And the reason for that is because you will see that they don't really have that test taking experience anymore in school. Right. So because of that, they tend to see that test taking is something that is more a bit more strange, a bit more alien to them, right? And it takes a bit more time for them to adapt to it, right? So I would say that that is probably the part of that that was lost, right? Because if you look at it last time, right? So last time you were probably more battle hardened in the sense that once you enter into school, there were tests and everything, and tests become something that you were very comfortable and very familiar with in a very quick period of time, right? When you first go to school as a student, but now a bit less so. So I would say because of that, you also see that in terms of the need to adapt, particularly as they go from the P2 to the P3 level, there would be that kind of adaptation that is needed, right? And I think here is also important for us to get the right perspective, even as parents and as teachers, right? The idea is that I realized over time as well that students themselves tends to see the exams itself as like that evil, right? Is the one that is the source of all the stress, everything that is not good, everything that's unpleasant about it. But really, if you really look at it in the right perspective, right? The right perspective here is that exams itself are neither good or bad, right? So the exams themselves are really just a way, if you look at it in the right perspective, it's really just a way for us to track the progress and understanding, right? As students, right, when we do a test, it's a good way for us to see, oh, for this particular topic, have we digested it properly or not? Have we understood it properly or not? Right? So it's not about comparing between myself and Paul or myself and Ivan, like who score higher or who is the top student in class. It's not really about that, right? Because that can change from test to test, right? And sometimes there can also be a heng sui factor, right? So maybe you were a bit luckier in this test, you got a bit higher mark, right? But aside from that, more importantly, is just to see, right, on these certain topics, on this certain component, how have you done, right? And I think that's the more important perspective to have in mind because I think even as parents and as teachers, right, sometimes whenever there is a test or a quiz, we tend to be very focused on the top line score, right? So you just say, oh, this is a score that you got, and this is good, this is bad. But I think beyond that is really understanding that be it, any kind of assessment, whether it's weighted, non-weighted or quiz or a test, I think there is a treasure trove of information within, right? For us to recognize where the child has done well, where are the areas that they need to work on. And I think if we come from it from that perspective, it really helps in terms of changing that perception, right? That a test is not just a ranking exercise, but more a way to discover where we need to work on, right? So I think that is also getting that right mindset, right? And I think that's even more important now, particularly as tests become more of this stranger concept to students and children too, right? So that's really the first implication that I want to highlight. And with that also you will see another thing that will change is the report book so-called. You will know that in the past actually if you got your report book, right, the report book actually provides for our time, right? There was a lot of score, a lot of comparison, right? I remember last time, right, when we first got our report book, you will have things like what's your rank, right? So, some even have like rank in class. So, of the how many students in class, what is your position? And, this is the score and how do you fare, right? So, you will see that that also again creates a lot of comparison, right? So, you will inadvertently then compare between you and your friends, right? Or your children and your neighbors' children. So that itself is not that helpful. Again, from what I mentioned just now, right? The idea is that it should not be just a matter of comparison, but really figuring out where are the areas that they can work on. So you can see that is why also right now you won't see a report book in that format anymore, but instead it has been replaced with what we call as a holistic development profile. So if you look at the right side, that is an example of how it looks like. What are the key changes if I just summarize here for you? You will see that, some things that are removed, you won't see anymore. That you won't see like what is the class and level position. So you won't see that thing like out of 25 or 40 students, what is your position, right? You won't see that anymore. You won't see like the minimum and maximum mark. So last time they had that. Sometimes they have, oh, what is the maybe sometimes they will give you the lowest mark, or sometimes they may give you like the lower quartile. That's what they can give you. But now no more already, right? They also don't want the student to know like, oh, actually their mark is like the lowest or the highest. They have removed that as well. And instead, what are they emphasizing more on now? You see a few things. One, um, what have they retained is like your conduct grade, right? Your behavior, your personal qualities, the teacher's comment about you, right? And in terms of some of the other things like your attendance, your involvement in CCAs and community service. But of course, that one will be more relevant when you go to the middle and the upper primary level. But you'll see that at the lower primary, a few things that are of focus, right? So for example, like the conduct grade, teachers' comments, etc., etc. But generally, you can see again that trend, right? Is that it is more holistic focus, right? So it's not just about academic focus, and certainly is trying to do away with comparison. So that is one thing that you will see also that will be a change. And that itself, I would say, is also a welcome development because, again, it takes away the stress from the students. That is not so much about having to deal with the artificial stress of comparison, but it's really just to work out, right, what is, interest to the student, what you want to explore more on, what you want to do, what you want to work on, right? Okay, this one I won't go through in that much detail, but you can see that this part is again sync up with what we mentioned. Because understandably now, right, you will see that in terms of the report card, it has done away more of the focus on comparison. So naturally, if you look at it in terms of some of these academic awards, and I'm sure you all are not, unfamiliar with that, right? So, many of you may even in your own time have received this EduSave, Good Progress Award, Merit Bursary. But you can see that what happened is the criteria has changed quite a bit. So last time you see is really purely numbers, right? So I look at your academic performance, you are top 25%, I give it to you for P1 and P2 bursary. And if you improve, and you are top 10% in that, I give you the Good Progress Award. But right now, you see, it's a bit different really. It's no longer a numbers game. In fact, from 2019, so you see some of these developments, I must also emphasize, they are not like new, like last year kind of thing. It's some of it is, a couple of years back already. But it may be things that you are also less attuned to because you may be a first time parent. So it may be the first time since your time or since maybe your niece and nephew several years back that now you are sending your child to primary school again. So I just want to also highlight some of this. And you can see what happens here is um, they have done away more with the number metrics, but it's really more of that overall assessment. That means, it's not just about you being the top 25%, but it's whether you, based on your teacher's assessment, is somebody who exemplify some of this quality. For example, like diligence, curiosity, etc., etc. Okay, so that's the part that you need to know that has changed quite a bit. So it's in a sense, it's less numbers driven. It's more focused on the qualities and character of the individual, right? And you can see these three things all go hand in hand, right? So the holistic profile, the doing away with exams, and also the focus more on this kind of metrics for the academic awards, right? So that's the part. And the next one I want to come to. So you see the first part I talk about, the implication really is, less focus on tests, but it's again the message I want to drive home here is it's not to say test is not important, test is evil and stay clear of it. I think it's really about getting the mindset right. And especially from a younger age, given now that there's a more of a safe space for that conversation, to really let students know from the get-go that anytime you have, a non-weighted assessment, anytime you have a quiz, don't treat it as a comparison. Treat it just as a way for you to discover about yourself, right? What you are good at and what you need to work on. And I think that perspective would bring them very far, even in terms of building that resilience. I would say that, in fact, if you look at many of the top students that we do work with, be it from our experience as teachers or even as students ourselves in school last time, you see that a lot of times, right? The problem with a lot of the top students is they lack resilience, right? So you see, when they do very well, they do very well. But the absolute moment when they fail something or they slip up at something, that's when they absolutely crumble, right? Like they just crumble and sometimes they don't even pick themselves up after that. And the reason for that is because they have never really, number one, it could be the case that they have never really faced failure in their life, right? They have really not seen that much of it. So that's why it becomes something that really affects them negatively. And number two is, I think more importantly as well, is really the mindset. Because the way they look at it is that once they don't do well at something, and that's something I also touch a bit on later in terms of the mindset, which is very important, they see it as a reflection of their whole person, that is a failure on their part, right? And that is something that is bad for them. But I think if all along, if we change that mindset a bit, that a test itself is not just a pure reflection of you as a person, but it's more just a fluid thing that reflects how you progress over time. And sometimes, that could be good, that could be bad, there can be ups and downs, but it's about managing it from that perspective. I think it also helps in terms of really building that resilience over time too. Right, so that's really the first takeaway that I want to also emphasize, particularly as we work with students. We do see now increasingly, especially amongst the lower primary, that aversion to tests, and I think as they go into middle and upper primary, then that stress that kicks in as well, right? So I think that's something that we need to get them used to. I think it's a bit like, in a sense also like vaccination, right? So you see, it's like vaccination, the concept of that is what is vaccination? Vaccination is you give a bit. How does vaccination work, right? Vaccination is you enable the person to become immune to this disease or this virus. And how we do that is to give them a little bit, a weakened form of the virus for a start, so that their body can get used to it. Correct? And the same goes with water as well, right? So the water is that if we there's this idea that if we keep giving our young children very clean pure water, like very filtered pure water from young, and they don't have exposure to any germs or anything. If they grow older and then they take like tap water or anything, then their stomach may feel funny. I just give it as an example, right? And what's the idea behind all of these examples that I gave is some basic exposure, right, is always good for a start. But you see that once you take away that altogether, it creates a very sterile environment that may not be the best for them. So I think, as with some of these developments, it's always useful that even with the taking away of some of this, is to make sure that their mindset is still correct and to make sure that they are still exposed to some of these, idea, right, about how they should think about exams, how they should think about quizzes and everything. Then that will really help them in terms of building their strength and resilience, right, as they go into the upper and the middle primary level. Okay, Ken? Yeah. Okay, so that's the part now to take note. Okay, so to a question from the parent, so right now at the P1 and P2 level, there is no weighted assessment concept. So it varies from school to school. The idea of the weighted assessment concept kicks in more at the middle and upper primary level. But at the lower primary level, what happens now is that depending on the school, some school do away with that altogether. But in some schools, there is still this concept of quiz and activities. But it's not weighted in the sense that it does not contribute to a score, but it's more like, in a sense, a kind of in-class activity that the child will just do. So in a sense, it's what we call as a non-weighted assessment. So that's usually how it's done. But again, there could be some differences across different schools, some flexibility in how they determine it. But the general running thread across schools is that they have done away with uh, all the midterms, all the end of year exams, and so on. But really, any kind of assessment also at the lower primary level is non-weighted in the sense that it does not contribute to a score, but it's more done as a standalone activity for the child to explore, right? So that's usually how it's done. But in that, there is some differences across schools in how that looks like. So why I say that is because you will see that as they go to the middle and upper primary level, right? The kind of testing format will become more consistent. And I'll show you what that looks like later. That means, in short, like for mathematics, there could be one paper that they have to do, right? With some questions, some problem sums. But at the lower primary level, there's a lot more flexibility in what that task looks like, right? So it may not be actually like a paper, but it could be like a little quiz. And again, right, most of the time, for the schools themselves, it won't contribute to a score. It's a non-weighted thing. So it's really just as a task that they do, just for them to get a sense of where they are and everything. So that's the part to note. Okay. Yeah. Okay, now the next part I want to highlight is in terms of subject-based banding. Subject-based banding is an important concept because you will realize that this is quite a big change from last time. And you will see here what happened for subject-based banding is you will see during our time. What's more common to you is the idea that EM1, EM2, EM3, correct? But that is really a very old concept already. So it has ceased to exist in school now. So there's no more concept of a 1, 2, and 3 where your child is streamed into a different category at the upper primary level. That has ceased to exist. But what has replaced that is really this idea of what we call as a subject-based banding. And subject-based banding here, right, you will see essentially what that looks like is it really allows the child that flexibility to take a combination of subjects at the P5 and P6 level, depending on their ability level of the child. And why am I bringing this up now is because you will see actually in primary school, right? For better or for worse, you see that ultimately, at least for now, I would say, right, in the short term, the goal still works towards at the end of P6, the milestone exam that they have to clear, right, which is the PSLE. So ultimately, a lot of it is really working towards that. So whatever implications will also arise because of implications at that level. So here, a very pertinent development is really that of the standard and foundation subjects. So you'll see here at P5 and P6, there's no longer EM1, EM2, EM3, but instead, uh, based on their ability, right? That means, let's say if the child is pretty strong at English, Chinese, or even science, at that middle primary level, but consistently they really struggle at mathematics, right? And perhaps, they are struggling at a level where the school and the teacher feels that perhaps maybe that pace, for the standard level subject is not that helpful for the child anymore because of too much, gaps in terms of the fundamentals. That's where they will actually recommend maybe the child can do a foundation level subject for that particular subject. So what is the difference, you may ask, right, between standard and foundation at the P5, P6 level is really in terms of the content coverage. So the number of topics that the child covers at foundation is going to be less compared to a child doing at standard. And the test requirements then will also become a bit more simplified. So that is what has changed, right? And you will see that it's a good change in the sense that you will see here again, it's not like all or nothing thing like the past, Because if you see in the past, what happens is at P4 there was a streaming, right? It's pretty much all or nothing if you think about it. Quite a scary concept that, once you don't do well at P4, you get into EM3. It's not to say it's the end of the world, but it's just to say there is a lot of implications for what happens down the road. But now you see there is no more streaming into a bucket, but instead the child is allowed that flexibility to take this combination of subjects. That means it's still possible for all the subjects that they are good at, they can take at the standard level. But for that subject that they struggle a bit more with, then they take at the foundation. So it really helps in terms of catering to the ability level of the child. And usually when is this done? This is done at the end of P4, where after the child takes the exam. So when it comes to P3, P4, there are these exams, and when the child takes the exams, based on the year-end results, that's where the school will also recommend the subject combination. Okay, so that's one key thing that has really changed in school already for the subject-based banding. And again, I think that's a welcome development because then the children really have a space, right, to grow, right? And it's also recognizing that you see here, right, that children mature at different phases. So you cannot say that just because, at P4, end of year, you didn't do well, you go into EM3 like the past. Because sometimes it takes time for them to flourish, for them to mature, right? And you wouldn't want to just constrain and just limit their growth by dumping them in a certain bucket, right, at a young age. So that this is a development that allows and cater for that. Okay. Okay, the next part here is with regards to the PSLE scoring system. So that is another big thing that has changed. So again, here I'm weaving in some of these developments across the primary level also, so that you can see also how that can cascade down. And you will see over here, one big change in the system is the change in the PSLE scoring. So during our time, we went on a T-score system. That means it's upon 300 marks, and then, if you get 268, you can get into certain schools. If you get 240, you get into certain school, correct? By upon 300. And that's a T-score system. But right now, you may wonder, right? Because you will read the news and you will hear about interviews with students and everything. Now it's a bit different in that you will hear about this AL score system, and you may have wondered what that is about. The AL scoring system actually, it does not change the fundamental nature of the test, right? The PSLE is still doing test paper, is still being marked, right, based on the number of questions that you got correct. Those have not changed. But what has changed is really the outcome, right, in terms of the scoring. So you will know that, if you look at the T score, which is during our time, there's a lot more possibility of what you can score. That means you see out of 300, there's so many score you can get. It's like there's more than 200 possibility, right? So if you count it mathematically. And the scores of each student is more finely differentiated. What does it mean? So it could be I got 245, Paul got 244, Ivan got 243. Very finely differentiated, right? There are many of these possibilities. But right now, you will see AL score is not like that anymore. So AL score is how it works is I will just show you. It looks like that, right? So AL scoring system, if you look at this, you will see here for the scores for each subject, it is mapping to a certain score, AL score. So let's say if we take an example for like English, let's say your overall score out of 100% is 90 marks and above for your overall marks. That would mean you got AL1. If you got 85 to 89, that is AL2, 80 to 84, AL3, and so on. So you can see here for that particular subject, the better your performance, the lower your AL score, correct? But the other thing that you know is that you can also see there's a certain bucketing concept here, right? So if you are 85 to 89, you are just in AL2, right? If you are 80 to 84, then you are in AL3. So it's like a certain group. So what's going to happen after that is based on your AL score for each subject, we will then tally them together to figure out what's your overall score. So for example, if you are somebody who did really well, like English, you got AL1, Chinese AL1, mathematics AL2, and science AL2, for instance, then your overall score is a 6. And 6, that is the overall score that you will use in terms of the entrance to the different secondary schools. So the different secondary schools, they will then look at your overall score. Each of them will have their own cutoff, and from there they will determine whether it is possible for you to enter their school. So that's how it works now. And you can see with that system, right? It is more, I would say, there are good and bad about it, right? In that, what's the good about it is you can see there is less of a rush for that final mark. So it's not like, wow, if only instead of 245, I got 246, right? And there's always that rush for that last mark in the past, right? There's always that scramble for that one mark more. But you see now it's not as meaningful anymore because instead of the scores being finely differentiated, like last time there's more than 200 scores, right? Right now, there's only 29 only, right? So there's only this AL score of possibly lah, right? You can get an AL score of 4, then you go all the way up, 5, 6, 7, 8, etc. There's 29 possible ones that you can get. So what the implication is from this is the good thing is there's less of a scramble for that extra mark, right? But the other thing that has come up is that it's also become more competitive. Why? Because more students are going to have the same AL score. What do I mean by that is you see last time, right? Let's say maybe you got 245. If you go around Singapore and you ask, how many people got 245? Quite likely not that many people, right? Because there's so many different possibility of scores that you can get, correct? But right now, if you let's say you got AL 12, I mean total score of 12, you go around and ask in Singapore how many people got 12. A lot more people will have 12, correct? So you just think about it mathematically and logically, there are going to be more people with the same score as you because there's less fine differentiation. And that's where the competition comes up because now the school is not going to see your raw score. They are just going to see your final. So 12, 12, and they determine who will come in on that basis. So the idea here is that then your selection of schools become much more important as compared to the past. In the past, perhaps, uh, not say not important, but now it has become much more crucial. How you are given six choices of schools, right? How you choose that will become very important in trying to maximize your chance of entering the school. So that is another key change that has happened. And usually, where do schools starts to sensitize students to that concept of AL? Some schools they will do it only at the P5 level, right? So at the end of year exams, then they would in the holistic profile, they will actually let the students know, okay, this is your AL equivalent. Some will be a bit earlier, right? So in the middle primary, that's where they already start to let the child know about this concept. But you can see this is again a very big change, right? And I will say that there are things that are great about it and things that we have to note that there are certain implications. Okay, so that's also another big development at the PSLE and also the primary school level. Finally, the last one, and I think this is an important one, with a very practical takeaway, is the idea of direct school admissions. And this is an important part because you will see here in terms of the stats, it's getting increasingly common, right? So, what is direct school admissions? Direct school admissions, uh, perhaps as a show of hand, right? Just amongst those of you in the chat, how many of you know what is DSA? You can raise your hand if you know. Right? How many of you know what is DSA into secondary school? Okay, so it's a welcome development. I don't see many hands raised. Thanks. I see one or two. It's a welcome development. Why? Because it is a very important development, and it is something that I would say it is good to start earlier rather than later. So, what is the direct school admissions, and how is it different from the past, right? Our time. So, during our time in the past, there was no such thing as direct school admission. In short, right? You want to go to secondary school, you will just do well in the PSLE and try to maximize your chance of entering. That's it, right? But right now, a very big part of it is not just about the PSLE, it's also about these alternative pathways, which is this idea of what we call as direct school admissions. And direct school admissions is a way for MOE to recognize that not every child, is going to be academically inclined, right? But they have different attributes, they have different strengths. Some of them could be good at piano, some of them could be good at music, could be good at sports. And MOE wants to recognize that you know because they are good at this, they need to be recognized for that. They also need to be recognized that there is scope for them to contribute to schools using these talents that they have, right? Be it in certain CCA and so on. And this is where MOE allows this alternative pathway for you to enter into school. So I can give you a very practical example. That means let's say there's a certain school that you want to get into. Maybe I'm not endorsing any school, but let's say we just take as an example, maybe like Victoria School. So maybe you want to get into Victoria, but you see the AL score is not really quite what your child is at right now. So if you look through the PSLE, it's quite difficult to get in. There is an alternative pathway. The alternative pathway is through the direct school admission, where Victoria itself will provide what we call as the talent domain, talent areas that they want to recruit students for. So for example, maybe Victoria is very strong at say choir or very strong at say badminton, and they really want students for that. So if your child has a good record of that in primary school, that means they have taken part in competition, taken part in CCA on that, it's possible that actually through this selection and through this interview, Victoria grants admission to your child to enter the school without PSLE, That means you just get in, right? There is a catch. The catch is that you need a minimum score for the PSLE, but that's not the same as the cutoff. So the minimum score is AL 20, the overall score of 22. It's just to make sure that you can get into the what we call as the G3 or the equivalent express stream in the past. But that's a lot lower a bar compared to right now if you want to enter Victoria is a single digit score, correct? So that is the key difference now. The idea that beyond the PSLE, there are alternative pathways for you to enter into secondary schools. And I would say, I think you may ask me, but teacher, is it like a very common thing or very niche? I show you the stats. It's not that uncommon. You see, right now, um, close to 10%, of the student cohort uh, is admitted via DSA, right? And increasingly, a lot of students are trying for that. And you can see what's the implication here is that the implication here is there are ways to enter into schools beyond just academics, but it is important to start young, correct? Because the thing is that it's also one thing, right? So let's say you use the example that I talked about earlier. You cannot say, oh, Victoria, I want to get in, but actually I played badminton, but I only started in P5 and it's a hobby, so I play with my brother. That's not enough, right? What you need to show is that track record of competence, that ability and willingness to take part in the sport. So there is a kind of a building of a portfolio. So you can see a lot of the most successful students, right, is number one, when they enter into CCA at middle primary, they would have entered into that right CCA already, right? And through that CCA, they would have taken part in the competitions. They would have shown the track record. In fact, some of the most successful students are they are not even constrained by their CCA, like their parents would even help them in terms of taking part in competitions like outside school, like some of those STEAM robotics competition. And how these are all possible is that identification of that ability and interest starts really early. That means even at, I would say, even the lower primary level, it's not too late already to just understand where does the child's interest lie. For example, it seems that my child does have that interest, right? If I look at it in terms of uh, like robotics, in terms of coding and that kind of thing, or STEM or STEAM related things. Or right now, actually, coding is less of a funky word, but is more of a that whole move towards AI and apps and everything as well, right? But it's about that really, right? And you can see that there's a lot of ways for us to start young from that, right? Recognizing some of this, and then after that, knowing where their interests lie, and then building them along that path and building what we call as a portfolio around that. You will see that starting young just by doing this gives a real competitive advantage. Because I would say that even like I also help a lot of students with DSA, and the most successful students are the ones who already has a story that I can tell. Like for example, this student just very naturally, right? You can see that whole track record of robotics. He has been taking part in competitions, and surely of course it starts more from the middle primary level, but that identifying of that interest has to start earlier because and that could be where you see essentially at the lower primary P1, P2 level. That's where that exploration has to happen already. That means there is runway for that. And that's where you can already see, okay, my child seems like he's more interested in this. There's some ability and some potential there. And perhaps that's something that I can build on. But that has to start early because if you're not, then it's very difficult. Like, for example, I was also trying to help my niece for her DSA, right? But hers was more on infocoms. So she's quite interested in infocoms, but infocoms, there's more of a niche, right? So there's only certain schools that has that. So that's the part, right? So the idea is, find that interest area early. And I would think that this is beyond just, it really kills, uh, I would say, two birds with one stone. What I mean by that is one, there's a very practical purpose to it. That, there is this route in now, right? That I want you all to be aware of very early on because you can see how this information advantage can help you very early in terms of having a pathway into a school that you want. And number two, uh, it's just also just for the sake of the child's development. That right now, if you see answering the call of MOE, right, that is beyond just academics, it's also holistic development. So it's about given that now you have the runway, right? How do we identify what are these interest areas? What can we grow from there, right? So that's also the important part. So just to take note of that. So it's a very important implication, and it's something that will filter down, right? Because you cannot start at P6. That's the thing. Anybody that starts at P6, it won't be good enough for DSA. If anything, what we do see as the most successful students would have been from at the minimal, like that middle primary level. They would have started already, right? But beyond that, you can see you work backwards, then you need to know then where is the interest area even before that, correct? So that's the idea behind it. But it's not to also say that academic excellence is not important. So I also don't want like after this section, you all go away with the idea that, oh, now going to primary school, everything like maybe academic not so important anymore. Unfortunately, that's not the case still. I would say if anything, it's really more of a combination, right? It's more of a combination. Um, Academics still very important. That's why you see the PSLE. Um, in fact, I think if you look at recently, there has been very encouraging discussion. It seems like even though there's some thinking that maybe the PSLE as its own format right now should not be the format to stand. But I think in the near term, it's probably still going to be something that is still there, at least for now, right? So I think that is still there, but more importantly, it's also complemented with more of these other areas, be it like in terms of non-academic skills. And I think that's something that is very important because I think, in the long past, I think even for my own parents, I think they were very focused on really just the pure academic parts, right? The academics is very important. You need to do well at academics, and that's the key part. But right now, you see there's a lot more pathways. So it's also the idea of recognizing these different interest areas and really building them. Okay, so that's the other thing, takeaway that I want to highlight here as well. And with that, right? So if I were to summarize this part, this is essentially the three key things that y'all can take away now going to primary schools. Number one, less of an overemphasis on academic results. Number two, more of a holistic focus, recognizing students' talents and catering to varied strengths. And what does that mean for you all? So, like what I mentioned, it's beneficial to start early in terms of identifying your child's strength and interest, even from the lower primary level. And number two, I think it's about really getting the mindset right. That now, true, no more like high stakes tests at a young age. But I think getting the mindset right that, test is not just a arms race, but it's really a way for us to track progress. I think that perspective is important to make sure that they have the resilience going into the middle and upper primary level. And I think these are important messages that I thought will be concrete and very important to note because you will see here it makes a lot of difference, right, between a child who has that perspective in mind versus one who don't, particularly as they go to the I would say where that jump is. Usually there will be two main jumps. One is from the P2 to the P3 level, and one is from the P4 to the P5. And that's usually the parts where students will struggle quite a bit. Why? Because number one, there is more of an expansion in terms of the academic requirements. And number two, also in terms of the coverage of the content that is needed there, right? Okay. Yeah. So with that, right now, I've talked about this part, so I won't cover this again. But it's what I mentioned regarding the challenges lah that still comes up, right, as you go into primary school, arising from these developments. The next part here is I want to talk a bit more about, as adults, right, as the caregivers, the parents, the teachers, what are the key things that would be important in terms of working with our students, our children, right, to equip them with the foundational skills. And I think this also comes from the perspective, of our work with students, particularly at the lower primary level, and how what we see, right, makes a difference between somebody who has acquired these skills and some who haven't. And I think one of the key part here is really the first portion on literacy and that ability to read. And you will see that this is something definitely that is important for the child to really start from a young age in terms of the reading portion. And it's something that you will see in terms of a skill, right? What practically it means is it carries over into many subjects at primary school level. So what do I mean by that is because you see, right, it does not actually affect only English. So a lot of times you'll think, oh, if you don't read well, you cannot do English. But the reality is not that actually. The reality is that literacy, the ability to read, the ability to understand text, carries over into other subjects. So I work with students who also do math and everything. Um, Maybe a bit less so at lower primary, but you can see the difference really starts to come in at the middle primary level where you have longer problem sums. Then sometimes I wonder, so I walk around and the student will be like, I cannot understand the question because now the problems get a bit longer. Instead of one sentence, it's like two or three sentences, right? And they have problems understanding it. So once they have problems understanding, they lose out in that sense that, other people already start to work out the answer, but they are still trying to understand what the question is trying to say, or they understand it wrongly, so their working is totally wrong, right? So you can see it carries over there. And finally, also when they come to like the middle primary, primary three level, they have to do science, right? Science actually is another topic where, that ability to understand text is important because it helps them to understand the concepts. And secondly, in terms of, there's this part in science that's what we call as the open-ended question. Uh, Many students with language-related problems also struggle in that. So what's the message here that I want to deliver is reading and literacy is not important only for English. It's more or less important across every subject other than your mother tongue, right? And that's also why you all will realize why is it that, that English as a subject is always so critical, be it at the primary or secondary level, right? That they will always see, I need you to at least pass it, or I need you to get a minimum grade for that. It's because it is the language of learning, actually, right? And we need to think of it that way. So if anything, what is the core, like to really target right now is really that ability to be able to read from a young age, right? And there is a practical implications. And like what we mentioned here, right? All these subjects are in written words, and you can see the benefits of that. Is like it will compound itself over time because the moment the child can read well, right? As an early reader, they are able to read well. They can understand things better, and that's where also they have the ability to read more, right? As compared to somebody who doesn't like to read and doesn't want to read, right? Or don't have that ability to read, right? The more you can read, the more you can accumulate like information, and also, in terms of grammar, vocabulary, and everything. And that will also help, right, in terms of compounding that returns on reading. So that's also the other important part as well. And you can see here, so here at my stretcher, actually, one focus area that we look at really is also programs on phonics, right? And there are really two areas that we look at and focus on when we help the child in terms of reading and so on. One is, of course, in terms of the phonetic pronunciation, how they sound out each alphabet, how they make sense of each of the word, including the blends, right? And secondly is, of course, that technique on commonly cited words. So you can see in every sentence, every text, there are usually going to be some of these words that are commonly recurring, right? And that's what we want to get the child to be exposed to be familiar with all these commonly cited words, right? And this we can do through is essentially what we do as a graded level reading books. That means it's one level by one level, right? Once they get through a certain level of commonly cited words, then they get to a next level that is more complex. And you can see by doing it like that, it helps the child in terms of graduating to a higher level of phonetic proficiency and their ability to be able to read. So it's really about, incorporating a similar system, right? As you do that for your child, particularly in terms of the second part on the level, right? So the idea is, as you introduce your child to certain books, it's also important to do it progressively. So a lot of times when we work with students, you can also see, oh, sometimes you see our child, oh, it seems like they are reading pretty fast. So maybe this level they're already done already. So we can really skip and go to a much more complicated level. But we also have to be very careful about that because as they are young, as they are doing this for the first time, it's also important that we do not discourage them by forcing them to be exposed to something that is way beyond their level. Because once you see that they are discouraged, once they see that, oh, this is actually too difficult for me, I don't like reading is a chore, is something that is dreadful for me, and then they'll be turned off from that. So you don't want to actually just set their interest from the get-go. It's important to do it progressively. And the practical tip of doing that is really building that confidence. That means once you see like a certain level of reading books, they can sort of get it. It's not about graduating to the next level straight away, but it's about mixing a bit. So you mix, a certain level, a fundamental level of books with some books that are more advanced. And then from there, you see how is the child adapting. And you can see this on the next slide where it's important to know right now, like where is the child at in terms of the proficiency level, right? And I would generally say that generally at this age, there are three types, right? One are those with no reading ability and no phonics related background. I think for this part here, it is important to start in terms of making sure that they are able to build that system of pronunciation, of reading. That's the first part. Second, right, if you look at two and three, those are probably the ones that they can already start to read, but they are not really able to progress much. So if you are in that second category, then it's what I mentioned just now, the idea of progressive learning by mixing a bit. That means you can see, okay, so once they're able to, progress, maybe what we can do is we mix a bit of the current level of proficiency with the next level and see how well they're able to adapt. Okay? The third one is an interesting one. So the third one is there are actually practical examples. These are where you can see some students with that aptitude for reading. Actually, they can read, but they are not interested in reading. So like they'll be, oh, I don't really like to read. I can read, but I don't like to read, right? And sometimes it also has to do with the kind of prescription that we set on the kind of text that we read. And this is one example. So even for my niece, right? So when she reads, right? So the idea here is that uh, sometimes we like to prescribe to say that, oh, there are certain kind of books that you should read and maybe a bit less of others. I think as parents, sometimes we also have the kind of mindset, right? That, oh, these kind of books, for example, non-graphic, like graphic novels or comic kind of book. I want something that is like fiction, something that, is maybe better for their learning, but something with a lot of pictures, like comic book, maybe not so useful. But that actually is not really the case. So I think what is more important here is it's not so much to prescribe the nature of the text for the child, particularly at this age, but to really cater to their interests. That means it could be the case that, let's say the child loves to read even comics, like even like in the past, it was like during our time, the equivalents like Tintin, right? The comic. Um, if they love to read that, I think it's something good to just let them read, right? Let them be exposed to that. Let them explore their interest through the text that they are interested in, they're comfortable with, and they love. So once they do that, then they will start to build the interest. And over time, that's where they will be more open to exploring different style of text. So that's something that's very important to note. But if from the get-go we tell them, no, there are certain books you cannot read, there's only these books that you can read, it straight away becomes something like, we are forcing on them, right? That, oh, you are forced to read, right? And you have to read these books, and clearly you don't like it, but you're forced to read it. Then the very human instinct that they have is they are not going to read really, right? Because I don't like it. Correct? So the idea is really to help cater to them, right? And I think in this sense, there is, a need to be less prescriptive, but to be more open to the different styles and formats of books. And that's what happened for my niece as well. So um my sister-in-law is a bit more accommodative. So they would like let them read like comics and everything. And now she's quite a avid reader, right? And she doesn't, the truth is she doesn't just stay at reading comics. So over time, she realized, oh, actually, I like comic. Why? Because the pictures are fun, but I also love the story. And right now, when she goes to the library, she sees other books that are non-comic. She's willing to give them a try also. So it's giving them time, it's giving them that space to explore and to discover their interests also. Okay, so that's also the important part to note too, right? In terms of the literacy and the reading ability portion. The next part, so knowledge acquisition, I would say actually goes hand in hand with literacy. So, like what I said, if you can read earlier, building a reading habit from early on, it helps with acquiring knowledge. That's how students get to know about the world. Other than, of course, hands-on, uh, you know, understanding the world, the other big part of it is really about reading. And I would say here, actually, now there's a very practical thought, which is I think we will live in a world where students actually are exposed to, tech and, from a very early age. And sometimes you can see that, sometimes it's actually even quite disturbing. Like I think y'all have seen like the little toddler, right? They go to the TV screen, they put their finger on the screen and they try to enlarge it, right? And it can't be enlarged because it's a TV screen. It's not a smart screen, right? It's not an iPad or what. But you can see that why I use that example is because we live in a world where children from a very young age are already exposed to tech. right? Some of them even have, screen time from very early on. And I think there's good and bad in that, I don't think that is all necessarily bad in the sense that, uh, screen time and everything is not useful. So if you look at it from different perspective, is that it is useful to the extent that it gives them that digital savviness. And I would say that, for just to be practical, I would think that AI, large language models, you know, is going to be an integral part of our lives going forward. I think that it has changed irreversibly, right? So this whole thing about AI and all is not a fad. It is going to be something that stays. And I think as with anything else, anything that stays, it is important for us to see how we can make that a staple part of our skill set, right? But I think for students that young, right, very importantly is we need to moderate that amount of screen time or exposure that we give, right? So while it does help in terms of giving that digital savviness, because you would, as in we do see before, so I think we also work with students on STEAM, and different kind of STEAM related programs. It does help because for students who are digitally savvy, then I don't need to go through with them on, how do you even like turn on the screen? How do you even type, right? Or how do you even do some things like change between different tabs? So once they do that, once they know that, they have an advantage because they can then go on to the harder things, right? Be it in terms of prompts, in terms of some of the codes, right? So that's a good thing. But the bad thing is that if we have too much of it, number one, they become very reliant on these tools, right? From a very young age. And number two, it crops out the time they have for other kind of exploration. So you can imagine, let's say if they spend a lot of screen time on like watching like certain kind of cartoon or maybe playing some kind of games, it means that naturally they have less time for other things like maybe reading, correct? So it crowds out the time that they have for those other activities. That's number one. And number two, also in a sense, I would say it takes away a certain way for them to explore knowledge, right? What I mean about that is that sometimes you can see, especially when it comes to be it like, AI and everything, right? And you can see that there's an example that even very young students, sometimes they see that, oh, there's this thing called ChatGPT, right? I can give you an example, right? So, they know GPT. Then GPT, they see, oh, I need to write a composition. So GPT, you help me to write a composition. Right? I give you the title, help me write. That's what they do. And in fact, you can see across levels, primary, secondary, there are people who are already doing that and increasingly more. But you can also see what's the problem with that. Because as adults, when we do it, I think we see it as a productivity gain for us, right? Because GPT can help us to structure some of these thoughts, put them into an output very quickly. But that is fine because we already have built the foundation, right? We can already write, we already know appropriate grammar rules, the right vocab and everything. So it's really just using GPT as an enabler. But for young students, it's not the case. Young students, you realize they do not have a lot of these foundational skills, right? Their grammar is not fully there yet. Their vocab is not really there. Their ability to string words into coherent sentences is not really there either. So if they are given this help very quickly in their lives, right, you will see that they become very dependent on it and they are not able to form certain kind of skills that are formative to them, right? That means it may be the case that then their ability to be able to, for example, string words into sentences, and all that will be compromised, right? Because they have lost that independence or that even that ability to think at that time. So why I use this example is because I would say that that balance is important. But of course, I think perhaps it's more of a problem for the middle primary level. Lower primary, I think one thing is they probably are not even adept enough to really access the prompts and to type and everything yet. So maybe they won't reach that level, but it's still equally adaptable in that, if you think about screen time, I think it's, some exposure of it is useful to build that initial digital savviness. But I think at this age, it's definitely important to moderate that, keep the focus on some of these, like things that we do in the past, literally, right? Hands-on things, reading, right? Even a real book, right? Feeling the book, right? The pages, right? Living through the pages and then understanding the stories in the text. I think that's something that is helpful for them that kind of experience that it gives them in terms of learning as well, right? So that's also the other perspective lah, given the AI world that we live in right now, right? And and you can see over here, right? So leading on to the next part, which is on critical thinking skills. Um, this is also something that's quite important. You will see here, okay, so just to give a context, um, when we go into primary school now, you will see that actually, again, the kind of learning at primary school has changed quite a bit. So what do I mean by that is, again, if you just work backwards from the PSLE, right? You will know that last time in PSLE, if you just practice a lot of papers and maybe it's like for science and math, you memorize the way to do certain problems or certain questions, right? You can do pretty well, correct? But now it's not the case anymore. So now I would say the PSLE has objectively become much harder. And why? Because in the PSLE, you actually see questions that are what we call as non-routine questions. So I think some of you may see the this year's question, right? So if I go on TikTok and everything, you all can see the math one. The math one was the triangle question, right? The overlapping triangles. That was the hard one. For science, it's the OTA question, right? So they put the OTA, then they said the conductor of heat for the food and the leaf. Why is it that the OTA leaf can burn, right? So you can see what's the common similarity across these questions. The common similarity is that the question cannot be found in your textbook, right? So you cannot memorize it. The first time the student sees that OTA leaf question was in the exam, right? And that's what schools are trending towards. That I don't want to know how well you can memorize something. I want to know how well you can think about it. And I think that's also like if you look at it in terms of what they call as a 21st century skill, that ability to be able to apply what you learn in different contexts. And that's the idea of critical thinking, right? That you have learned this, that's right. But if I give you a totally different context, are you able to apply it in that context? And most of the time, again, I would say that these are things that students need to start young to learn. It really is the key differentiating factor. For somebody who, there are, I would say, different types of students, right? So there are the types that totally are really switched off, right? So they, uh, for that particular subject, maybe they don't like it, they really never understand the concept. So they struggle with the fundamentals, and that's a problem. But there's also this middle group that is probably there, right? So they have good fundamentals, but we realize, once they are asked to do certain academic tasks, they still struggle. And why? Is because they lack this portion on critical thinking. Because a lot of times the way their mind is attuned to things is, okay, Lord, you tell me this, I try to memorize or try to internalize it, and then I just vomit it out. But if you change the question a bit, wow, then I get very scared. Like a lot of times when I work with students, right? Like for math, you give them a new problem sum, they will just stare into blank space because they'll be thinking, well, this is just so new and alien to me. I don't know how to start. I don't want to start, right? But the mindset is not correct, right? So you see, the mindset here is that it's not just because it's new, it makes you scared, but rather, if it's new, you should be thinking, what is the concept being tested here? How do you apply it in that context? And that is something that you will see. Why I use the PSLE question as an example is that is what they are focusing on in school right now, right? And it cascades down to a young age, and the way to build that mindset starts young, actually. So what can we do about that is you can see is things like that, critical thinking skills. This is one thing actually that you can even do with your child, right? Like give them a problem, right? And for those at the lower primary level, and work with them on it, right? Of course, this one's a bit more difficult, lah. This Popeye one, you see, 5 people, any one time, 2 people go across, 1, 3, 6, 8, 12 seconds. A bit hard. This one, of course, got 5 people, and then you got different combination. But something easier is you can see the next one, right? The very classic one. So you have a boat that goes across the river. You have the goat, you have the ladders, and then you have the wolf. So any one time, two can go across. The wolf will feed on the goat will eat the lettuce, right? So how can you carry this stuff across such that everybody gets across safely? So create a problem, create something fun, and then from there, you get the child to think through, right? What are the steps? Because every of these question, in fact, is a problem, right? Life is made out of many problems. And in fact, us getting through life is about solving these problems, correct? So it's really, I would say, getting that mindset right again from a very young age that, number one, there are problems to solve in life. And in fact, don't think of problem as something that is unpleasant. right? In fact, your whole life is going to be made out of a lot of problems, right? And the way for you to progress in life is to get through the problem one at a time. So I think number one is to get that perspective correct. Then number two, now that we know, okay, there's a problem, we need to get to it, not to run away from it, is how then do we go about it, right? And here is a good example where you see then it's about breaking down the steps. What is the problem here, right? What is the objective that we are trying to achieve? Right? And how do we get there, right? And what are the steps that's needed to get there? So that kind of problem-solving approach, right, is useful. And this can be done like just we can always compile a whole repo of this kind of games and puzzles and things like that that we can then work through with the child during the free time. So it can be, like at home, sometimes, they can read, sometimes they can also do things like that, doing like a puzzle that perhaps you can even do together with them. So it's a good time to do some bonding, but also at the same time solving a puzzle together, right? So that will really help in terms of critical thinking that from a young age, they know, right? Problems are meant to be fun in that sense. They are not meant to be a dread. And second, they already start to appreciate what is the approach to tackling a problem. And you will be surprised in that a lot of times, across subjects, there are going to be similar approaches to solving a problem, which is first analyzing the requirements of the problem, second, understanding what are the key concepts that are being done, and then thirdly, breaking down the steps to tackle it. So it's quite similar. And here at My Stretcher, actually, in terms of the way we scaffold our materials, that's also how we do it to make sure that our students are guided, right, in tackling, be it like problem sums in mathematics, questions in science, or even like English composition and that kind of thing as well, right? And and that's the key part. So critical thinking. And finally, the last two I would say is really in terms of the allowing mistakes and failure. And this part I have talked about it just now. Is really the idea of making sure that they are able to take failure, and number two, making sure that they are resilient about it. And this is one just a very practical thing that and it's something that we do quite a bit in that, and it's quite a human thing also. I can tell you psychologically it's very interesting that even as adults we are like that. What do I mean by that is that we anything good that happen, right, then we will say, oh, like for example, something good happens to us, the way we will do it is that we would say, oh, it's because I'm very smart, right? So for example, maybe you did very well for this project, correct? And then you say, oh, yeah, it's because I was smart, so I did very well for the project. So you will praise the person, correct? But psychology has shown this, which is very interesting, when two things happen. So either when something bad happened to you, like for example, this project didn't turn out well, then you will tend to say, oh, actually, maybe it's not because of me. It tends to be because of the process and everything, correct? It's a way to justify and defend yourself, actually. It's a defense mechanism, right, from an adult's perspective, right? But you can see how that carries over, right? Is that how that carries over to the child is that you will see the same idea is that let's say the child does well in a test, and then you will say that, oh, you are very smart, right? You have done well in this test, you are very smart, and you are really great at math, right? Once you do that, right, you see it is a encouragement to the child at that time. But the inadvertent effect of it is it also means the next time if the child does a test and he does not do well, the thought that forms in his mind is that I'm no longer smart and I'm no longer good at math. Do you all see that? Right? That's the implication. So the whole idea of praise centered on intelligence or abilities, if carried over an extended period of time, can lead to this. And this is the example that I talk about because be it our work with students or even with peers and friends, that's what happens, especially for a lot of the higher ability students, in that for the longest of time, they associate all the good outcomes with their own abilities and intelligence. So once anything bad happen, straight away they see that it's a failing on their part, right? And that absolutely crushes some of them, right? And that's where the lack of resilience comes in. So very importantly, what's important is praising the process and effort that, oh, you did really well for this test. And I think, one thing to really commend is all the effort that you put in, right? And I really want to recognize that, right? I think you put in a lot of hard work and it has paid off, right? And that's great. So do you see how it changes the texture of things is then the next time when they do a test and they don't do well, then it becomes a bit different. So they won't say, oh, I'm just bad at this, I'm just going to give up. But instead, they will just say, perhaps I just didn't put in enough work. Or perhaps I just didn't get something right, right, in terms of the approach to doing something. And it's okay, right? It's nothing to do with me as a person. It's nothing final about it. There are still things I can change. There's things I can work about. So you can see how just the way we interact with them can give them a different incentive, right? In terms of how they react and respond to different situations. So that's something that is important in terms of building their resilience and also what we call as really building that growth mindset that they have about things. And this slide is what I mentioned as well. This is the example that I gave just now, right? So I think that's a very practical tip that we can adopt here. And I'm sure all of us have also seen those examples of, how these intelligent kids from young, right? They have done really well and they're very used to all these praises and how things just fall apart, right? When they go to like upper primary or secondary, when the crunch comes in, when they had problems adapting, they realize the praises faded away and then it doesn't become so sustainable anymore, right? So that's also something that's very important that whatever we do from young, how do we make it sustainable, right? How do we make that performance of the child sustainable? That is really predicated on the fact that they have that growth mindset, that they are able to build the resilience, and they recognize that, apart from personality, apart from themselves, that process and effort is really a big part of that as well, right? So that's really the thing that I think will be helpful, right? And I've also talked about this in terms of the growth mindset part, right? And I think this is something that is very important because you will know that even as students, so for the students, I've taught some of these like like upper primary students, right? Who even at upper primary you will think that it's quite a young age, right? That they already tell themselves that, oh teacher, I'm just not good at speaking. So you don't ask me to speak in class because I'm very shy. I don't like to speak. Or they'll just say, I'm just not good at math, or I'm just not good at English. So you'll see, and they're only at primary school. And at primary school, they are already boxing themselves into a box and saying, I'm not this, I'm not that. But the reality is that if you're only at primary school, actually you're pretty young. And a lot of things can still change, right? In fact, I can tell you there are students who, like literally, at primary six, they fail their math possible. But when it comes to secondary school, they get A1 for their mathematics. It's actually possible. So it is not a healthy thing for them to box in themselves at the primary school level. And that's something that we should also change for them. The idea that just because you so-called, didn't do well at something, it does not mean that you're bad at it. So it doesn't mean that you're bad at math. It just means that right now, right, you're not that good at it, but it can change, right? With work, with finding out the right problems, you can reverse things, you can change things, right? So nothing is fixed. So there's no need for a fixed mindset, but it's really understanding what can help in terms of getting you to grow and getting you to change that. And I think that's something that, just in terms of, putting aside academics, just in terms of building that right mindset, um, is important, right? Resilience, growth mindset to really help them to see through life as well, right? So that's also something that even from a young age, you can already start to. In fact, you don't even need to consciously do it, but in terms of some of the things that you do, like the way you praise them, the way you interact with them, it can already inculcate that in them accordingly, right? Okay, so that's also the thing to note. And with that, that's the second part that I've done, which is the key skills. And just to recap, what are they is this portion, right? So literacy, reading from a young age, right? Digital savviness to some extent with screen time and all can help but to be much more moderated, right? And number two, critical thinking, right? So critical thinking being a very important skill going to primary school. And then finally, the third part, which is I would say the most critical of them all, actually, that resilience and mentality, right? Resilience and growth mindset, right? So I think these are the things that will be useful to really build for the child, build with the child as they enter into primary school. Okay. Okay, then going on from that, I will just go to the tie-up segment on the academic requirements a bit because I think some of you may also wonder about that and some of the skills and progression. I won't go through that in that much detail, But the idea here is just to give you all a sense in terms of what are some of these requirements, as we go from like the lower primary to the middle and the upper primary level for the different subjects. So as you can see here for English, some of the must do and must knows that they should have at the lower primary level, I would say really is in terms of, but okay, maybe just taking a step back first, you will realize as with any language like English, mother tongue, the key proficiency that we are always looking at is really in terms of reading, listening, speaking, and writing. So any task is always centered on those four. So with that in mind, so as we build from the lower, middle to the upper primary level, you will see that for the lower primary, some of the key things that we do need is really in terms of that vocabulary build up, right? And also in terms of basic grammar rules. So I would say few key things. One, vocab. Two, grammar. And number three is that ability to then string them into a coherent sentence. And why are these important? Because it carries over into two things. Number one, that composition writing that they eventually have to do, right? Writing compo. You'll see a lot of times the strongest students are the ones who are, have a good broad range of vocabulary and they are able to use grammar confidently. Whereas for students who really stumble on this foundation, you realize when they write their compo, the grammar is inaccurate, the sentence is not coherent. So that affects the composition, right? So that's the first part. Second part is also it spills over into oral, the way they communicate. And one thing I want to highlight to you all is that right now in primary school, there is more emphasis on oral now. In fact, the weightage for PSLE just got revised, so it increased in terms of the weightage given to oral. So it shows you the focus, the emphasis that they are giving to oral nowadays. And it also carries over to that. So if let's say you struggle with vocab, you struggle with grammar, it does carry over in terms of how you communicate and your confidence to be able to speak as well. So these are also what we call as the more fundamental and foundational skills, right, that they need to be able to thrive for English, right? And next for mathematics. So mathematics, I would say if you are looking at the lower primary level, lower primary chances are, if you look at the problem sums, those are pretty straightforward. Number one, the question itself won't be that long, right? And most will be that one or two sentences. The operations that they do there is also easier. So really the focus at the lower primary level for math will really be concepts. And whole numbers is a big part of that. So it's really understanding whole numbers, understanding your basic mathematical operations, right? So plus, minus, times, divide, how to count, right? So these are the things that are important. What we do see are the topics that typically students struggle with, right? Especially at that lower primary block is fractions. So fractions is something that they find it a bit hard to visualize at the start. So as students at the lower primary level, they are very visual. So usually the way we look at it is, for example, we look at fractions, you think of it as a slice of pizza, right? So many pizza slice and use that as a way to appreciate, okay, how many parts of a pizza is being eaten. And then from there, get them to understand a bit more about fractions. That's usually how we think about it. So it's important. Why? Because fractions is a topic that would just permeate all the way together with whole numbers, right, throughout the primary school life. And it just gets harder from there, right? And you can see that it really affects because a lot of times students who cannot master, say, like, for example, fractions at a lower primary level, then they start to have problems when they do like multiplying fractions or dividing fractions at the upper primary, right? And that is the problem because at the upper primary level, that's where they have to deal with more complicated problems, and they cannot afford to really fall behind on concepts anymore. Okay, so that is also the other thing to take note to, right? That is important here for math, right? So math, I would say really lower primary, focus on getting the concepts right. And a lot of times it could even mean, just basic practices, right? So adding, applying number bonds, how do we do this basic question? Even getting them to start to familiar with a little bit of those models, right? Lower primary is still a lot about some of this model drawing and everything. Getting them familiar with that so that it builds the base for more advanced problem solving techniques at a later age. Okay, so that's for math. Science, I would say, is less applicable now because you are all at K1, K2, so perhaps a bit less so. But it's just to give you all a sense that in a sense, again, at the what we call as the P3 level, is more foundational concept focus. But when it comes to like P4, P5, P6, then a lot of times, again, the OTA question or that come in. So it's more high order thinking, being able to apply what you have learned in different contexts. But the assumption behind that is that you have make your base and your concepts very solid to begin with, right? So that's the idea behind that. And this is what I was talking about just now when we dive into the requirement. You can see over here for 4, right? So oral communication has gone up in percentage to 20%. So the weightage is higher now, right? So understandably, there's now a higher focus on speaking, right? At the language English assessment level. So that's something to highlight, okay? This is the PSLE format. So again, I'm just sharing that because there will be a cascade down, right, in terms of the focus areas and everything. Um, the next part, right, so if I just jump through to math and science, you will see the interesting thing is that, again, so if you look at it in terms of weighted and non-weighted assessment, typically for P1 all the way to P4, you only be dealing with one paper at most. But P5 and P6, that's where things will be a step up. That means instead of one paper, now you'll be dealing with two papers, right? Paper one and paper two. Paper one is usually the easier paper. So if you look at it here, it's mostly MCQ, but paper two is the what we call as really the more difficult paper where you have to do a lot of problem sums and it's more difficult. So again, right, the takeaway here is that there will be this jump from P2 to P3 and from P4 to P5. And it's definitely important to make sure that you are able to adapt to that earlier rather than later. Because what we have seen also is for a lot of students, right? You can't really see the problems if at least for those with not very obvious problems. P1 to P4, it's perfectly fine. That they can just surf through. That means like when it comes to exams like 3 and 4 level, right? P3 and 4, they may not even study much, but they can do quite well, right? And that's a reality. But it does not mean that they are great at that subject. It just means that actually at that point in time, the exams are not that difficult yet. And really, in terms of the questions asked, it's also pretty straightforward. But what you will see as a very common pattern, and that's what we see for a lot of our students too, is when they go from the P4 to P5, right? That's when the problem arises. Like once they don't study, it's possible that they fail. Like literally, they will experience failure in that subject, like mathematics in P5, because number one, the amount of content has gone up, and number two, the assessment requirement has become much more demanding. So you will see that, it is important to then start early, right, to be prepared for that. And how do we do that? Is really making sure their concepts are sound and making sure that they really put in the hard work in terms of preparing for the test and everything as well. Uh, but again, the one is more middle primary, but lower primary as you all enter, I think putting aside the test, I think it's more important to make sure that they do have some practice. That means you see, even if there's no outright test to prepare for, it's not to say they don't practice math, right? So I think sometimes it's like that, right? So sometimes parents think, no test, then no need to practice, lah, right? But it's not true. So mathematics is a subject. So if you look at it, when you go into primary school, there's English, mother tongue, and math, right? Math is the one that will require that practice. And it is important that even without tests, that the child needs to practice, he needs to apply what he has learned in school. That remains important because that's the only way for them to build their muscle memory. And I will say for things like mathematics, it is very important to build the muscle memory if you want to internalize certain concept. It's in education, what we call as also spaced repetition, right? Because the thing is, spaced repetition means, over time, you get back to something, you try it again, you try it again. So with that, then you can reinforce what you have learned. But if you never try again, that means once you learn in school, you go home, okay, you chuck your textbook aside, don't do anything about it. You won't remember anything, one, right? So you come back to it, you won't remember, right? Or you won't be good at it, right? Or you won't know the mistakes that you have made. So a lot of times you see for students, the best students really, it's not because they don't make mistakes, but rather it's because they have made it when they practice and they are aware of it. So they are aware, I tend to make this mistake, right? Like for example, when I add these two numbers together, I tend to make this mistake when I do the working. So I'm going to change that. I will make it again. So they recognize that, they change it. The problem with a lot of students is if they don't practice, they don't even realize they got this problem, right? They don't even realize they got these mistakes. And you can see how that affects when they go to higher level, right? Because when they go to higher level, there are many more things they learn, many more mistakes that they can make. And by then it's too late already. Because you see at lower primary, right, P1, P2, there are only that many things they learn. So it's very easy for us, very easy for them for us to work together, identify all these things and fix it all at once. Like maybe that 4 or 5 things that they are not great at, that they tend to have a problem with, a mistake, make mistakes, we fix it. But if we don't do that, it spills to middle primary, spills to upper primary. I can tell you by the time it reach upper primary, there are like 30, 40, 50 possible things that can go wrong. By then it's too late already because there are too many things to fix. And it's hard for us to find every single thing. So the mechanics of it here is, when it's manageable, fix those things that we can already identify. So once it's fixed, then you go to middle. Once you go to upper primary, then it is easier that way. Okay, so that's how we think about it as well. And so this is one example. So you see from our worksheet, this is an example of what we do in our worksheets too here at MindStretcher to really help our students. And you can see even at this is an example for primary one, letting them get some initial exposure already. So two things here, right? Initial exposure to what does a problem solving strategy look like. So here is identifying a pattern, and we try to scaffold it for them because we know that at the lower primary level, um, they can't really do a lot of things on their own straight away. So what we do is we do it progressively. We start with like a work example where you tell them, okay, this is an example of identifying a pattern, and this is how you go about it. Then after that, right, we give them an example that we work through together with them. So we handhold them a bit, we give them an example, and then after that, we give them some chance to practice on their own. So with that, it helps them really to build their confidence. And you will see on here why we call it the power code. Power code is at MindStretcher our way of equipping students with these problem-solving strategies, right? Because ultimately, you will see the pain point of all students for math is problem sums. So we get them to start early to appreciate this. And with that, then they can help in terms of building that confidence when it comes to problem solving, right? And this is also what I mean with regards to models. So in case this has not changed, so between your time and our time and now, it's still starting with models, right? And these are probably not things that are unfamiliar with you as well, right? But what has changed is that at that middle and upper primary level, the problem solving heuristics tends to become more advanced now, right? So a lot more compared to the past. But one part that has not changed is the models. The models have not changed, right? And I can tell you all a very interesting fun fact. So back in 2020, 2021, there was quite this infamous question in the math PSLE called the Helen and Ivan coin counting question. Have any of you heard of that? Maybe just as a show of hand, you all can type in the chat. Do you all hear of this coin counting question in the PSLE? Yeah, you all can type in the chat or raise your hand if you all have. Okay, I think 2 or 3 of you have seen that. Thanks for that. It was quite infamous in that year. I believe it was the year where the question was pretty challenging, and then there were like media reports that say, oh, the students cried, some vomited in the exam hall and everything, right? And some of the parents themselves tried the question and they said they got stuck, cannot do. So what's the interesting fun fact here is that the reason why parents couldn't do it is because you all can go and Google, then you know what I mean about the question. It's a coin counting question where you have to figure out the number of coins that they have. And many a times as adults, right, we tend to use the algebra method to solve things, correct? And in fact, we are guilty of it in that when your primary school child asks you a question, you tell them, I don't know how to do your method. I tell you how to do using algebra, right? But you see for that question, right? If you do algebra, you get stuck. You cannot do it. Like it will become very tedious, very advanced, very complicated. But the beauty of the question is that a middle primary student, if you ask them to do, they could have figured it out because it was really only model drawing. So all they needed to do is to draw the comparison model, like what we are doing in this question, and they could have figured out the question. So that question was a very good example of a critical thinking question where they are just testing you a concept that you already know on problem solving using models. But it's whether you know or not that you have to draw the model for that context. If you could do it, you can crack the question quite easily, actually. Yeah, so that was one example there that was quite interesting. It shows you what critical thinking and non-routine question looks like in the exam, right? And it's an example also of essentially how, having a good foundation, right? Having a good foundation, knowing your models well, and number two, having that confidence to solve problems really helps, right? When you do it from a young age, it really pays dividends once you go to the upper level, right? And one related thing to highlight here is when the algebra, the age-old question, right? So shall we teach primary school students to use algebra? The reality is that at P6, they already do learn algebra, right? But not too much. So I would say that in reality, students at primary school, they have a lot of tools to solve math. They do not really need algebra actually, right? So you can almost think of it. So the analogy I always use is that it's like, you slice a fish, right? uh, there are many ways for you to slice a fish, right? So you do not need to use a huge chopper to slice a fish. So the algebra is like the equivalent of a huge chopper knife, right? You do not need that because there are many other tools that you can use. They are more elegant, they are more readily manageable for the child. So that's how I think about it. Because the child at the primary level, because they are not so familiar with algebra, you see that many a times when they do their workings, right, they will make mistake. They make mistake, then cannot get the mark already. So more importantly is getting to know the different tools that they can use. And this is where we start. In fact, you see, even at P1, we already start. And that's what they do in school also. So even at P1, models, some of these basic heuristics, they will already start to expose them to it already. So it's something that's also important to recognize. Okay. And yeah, so that's also the idea. And you can also think of it this way that, the way we progress, like what I said just now, for like this subject is we go from something that is very concrete to something that is pictorial, like the model drawing, and then finally we go to something that is abstract, which is the algebra. That's in fact how the child's mind process it. So even right now, I would say at the lower primary level, is really that concrete phase that for a child to even start to appreciate what is model about. Why do we have models? Models essentially are pictures for you to represent information, correct? But for them to even appreciate that first, they need to start to appreciate the world around them, like be it like concrete blocks and everything. So it's even, good to think about, what are some of these manipulatives, right, that we can already get for the kid, like be it in terms of these Jenga blocks, appreciating how they come together, how one block and another block build up, give you like a tower, that kind of thing. So they can already start to appreciate that and how then that will help them as they go into lower primary. So that's something that you can also think about in terms of some of these mathematical manipulatives. Even like Jenga block also can be good. Or even some of those like sliding number block, right? Where you have all the numbers scrambled, right? So and then you try to put them in order one, two, three, four, five. Those are things that they can also already appreciate. Or even a very simple Rubik's Cube. It's really getting them to appreciate using their hands, figuring out how things come together. And from there, it will help. And really for math also, because math, eventually, there will be a lot of focus on visualization skills. So nowadays, even for math in school, they like to ask a lot about visualization. So, and visualization actually is something that some people are just not good at. Even myself, right? When I was younger, I found it really difficult to visualize things in my head, like be it like a cube, and that kind of thing, right? And that's something that you can actually train from young. That means getting them to, like what we said from that concrete angle, understanding how some of this visualization so that they can visualize better. That will be something that is important too. Okay. Yeah. And yeah, so that's the key part. So I will just wrap up here because I'm mindful of time, the last segment, which is I've today, I think just in summary, there was a few things that we covered. Number one is what are the changes in the landscape. Number two, some of the key foundational skills. Number three, if you look at the concrete academic requirements, what were there? I want to end off with this segment, which is then what I already covered some of these actually, right? So what are some of the practical tips that you can already adopt? But just to reiterate some of them, number one, I think is no harm, right? Like what we said, being familiar with the subjects and really having this daily routine of sitting down with the child and doing some written work. So the idea is, the myth is not because there's no test means no need to study, but it is important, particularly like what I mentioned just now, that idea of doing some of this practice to make sure that they reinforce their concepts. And it can be even a daily routine, like maybe that 30 minutes to an hour set aside for like if there's homework to practice that and also to do some of this what we call as revision. it could help, right, in terms of making sure their concepts are reinforced and making sure that there are no blind spots at this time that we are not fixing, right? That's the first part. And even here, even at my stretcher, I think, if it's something that, you feel that, you do not have the time for, we do have some of these programs as well, like P1 preparatory programs for English, mathematics, and Chinese that cater to our K1/K2 students. And also, even for primary one itself, we have our English, math, and science programs where we do like what I've shown you just now, right? To really expose our students in a very guided manner to make sure that they're able to pick up on some of these key questions, key concepts that they need to know, right? And from there also, yeah, the routine here, I think I've talked a bit about that routine and the timetabling. Um, that's something again, like as a sample timetable that can be used. Particularly, I would say this one, in case you're wondering what this is more like simulating for the K1 and the K2, right? This is more what it looks like a P1 timetable, correct? But what we are trying to do here is it can be simulated for the K1 and K2 just to give them a sense of what the experience in primary school can look like, right? That's coming from that angle. And yeah, so that's the key part. And over here, I think I would focus on this slide, which is how do we spend this quality time with the school going children? And I think particularly for adults and parents who are working, that is something that is always at the back of our minds, right? I think here one thing that can help is, when you're not at home, one possibility is that assignment of certain simple exercises for them to practice. So maybe if you have a practice book, you can tell them, okay, so Sean, when I'm not around, maybe come back home, you take a nap, right? So you create that routine for them, right? So this is the schedule. You take a nap at this time, and after you wake up, maybe you can just practice these few questions. Then at night, when I come back, we'll talk with them, we'll go through with them, right? So that could be how that works. And yeah, so even then, it's really after work, spending some time with them, talking about the school day, over dinner and everything. That's also a good bonding time. And then after that, really like checking through their schoolwork and some like what I mentioned, the short exercises on some allocated subject. So that's also the part that will be useful. Of course, I think sometimes people do wonder, like, on their own, that could be an issue that I find it hard to supervise the child, or maybe if I have a helper at home, the helper may not be in the best position to really supervise the child also, right? When it comes to the academic and holistic needs. So like what I mentioned, I think one thing that we do offer here at My Stretcher is really our MindSpark Students Care Center, so after school student care, where we do make sure that in terms of the students coming to the our MindSparks corner, we provide them with the things that they need, be it in terms of enrichment activities, or even in terms of some of these exposure to our curriculum, right? So they get to practice some of our materials, and we also supervise them in terms of their homework and all. So in short, it's really about, as they come to this place, they are taken care of, and at the same time, they also have their academic needs taken care of, and also more holistically in terms of some of these other aspects, in terms of their, like what I mentioned just now, right? Some of these critical thinking, STEAM-based learning, that kind of thing, right? Okay. And just to wrap up here, so I think this last part, which I mentioned with regards to the resilience, the growth mindset, I think it's something that's very critical. In fact, we have seen these media reports from time to time, even recently, right? And very unfortunate cases where, like negative, hurtful incidents that really have a devastating impact on the child. And I think very importantly, as part of that, because a lot of times we cannot control some of these external events that do happen, right? Because the reality is, as parents, you all are working, you're not going to be there for the child every moment of the day or even in school. So what's equally important, I would say, is apart from some of these external things that we cannot control, what can we control, right? It's really how we get the child to react to some of these incidents or some of these things, be it in terms of the resilience of the child, be it in terms of how they manage their emotions, and like things that I mentioned just now, right? The ability to take failure, the ability to see, negative things in a more positive manner and how it shapes their character and everything. So it's really about building their emotional strength. And I think that's something that, that would help them. And that's something that I would say is important, right? Given that you're also not going to be there for the child every 24/7 of the day. So it's important to let them know, right, how these are the tools that would be important for them in terms of managing, right, all these stresses, all this negativity from an external environment too, right? So I think that's also going to be a very important focus area, right, apart from just academics, right? And finally, the soft skills portion. So this part, I would say to end off on this is, remember what we came back to, right, just now about the DSA part. Um, Important to start early, because once you start early, I think it does give you a competitive edge. And beyond that, I would say also is it's just generally the fact that, even if you put aside DSA, you put aside the practicalities of things, it's just understanding that life is not just about academics, right? You know, beyond academics, there would be interest areas, there would be things that your child would love, and what would that be? So it's just a matter of seeking that out and finding that. But it's always a balance, you see. So I see sometimes the problem is, as parents, right, we always want to see, we are very eager to see where is the child best at. But it end up, it's like we spam them with like a buffet of things, So like in the weekday they have to go to school. Then weekend, oh wow, they got like this football academy, then they have to do this like piano, then they have to do this tuition. Then in the end it seems like, oh wow, there's quite a lot of stress also, correct? So I think it's really a matter of balance too, right? So how do we help them to find the things that they love, but still doing it in a way that does not just burn them out, in terms of the load that we impose them on. So I think that's also the other thing. But over time, I think, once, there are certain areas that they do settle on, I think it can help definitely pay dividends. But of course, it's different strokes for different folks. There are also going to be a lot of students, particularly at this young age, that things can change, right? So it could be that, for a certain period of time, they really love this, but and one day they can come back and tell you, oh, mommy, I'm not really interested in this anymore, right? So I don't really like to do this, right? I want to switch to something else, right? So even my own niece, she has switched across many different things, right? Going from like some table tennis, then he go to choir, then from choir he go to like robotics and everything. And it's common. And I think we need to also recognize that it will take time, right? And people will be continuing to explore. And we also need to give them that space to continue to explore these interests too. Okay. But of course, if there's somebody who knows what they want, settles on it early, build the interest, build the ability in it, that would be the most ideal, lah, right? But of course, that's something that we have to see for different students and different children. Okay, yeah. So yeah, this is just a picture of some of the things that we do here at MindStretcher. So you can see actually, for some of our MindSpark students, we have had some chess activities for them. We also have right in the middle, that's our co-founder, teacher Alvin. He has this flagship master speakers program where we actually give students the chance to learn about public speaking. You can see the student there is actually just a middle primary student. So really building that ability and confidence to speak in front of large audiences at a very young age. It's not easy, but that's what we also expose our students to. And here they are given a stage for that because you will see that we have a lot of students. So when we organize an event, it's possible that we can get a whole hall filled with hundreds of students, and then we give our own students the chance to speak, to be MCs, to deliver an address, and it helps them in terms of building the confidence and really to make sure that over time they are able to become more proficient communicators, more confident, and more engaging as well, right? So that's something that we do offer to our students, and we also have like these master speakers programs to really help them on this journey as well, right? And yeah, so that's really the key part. And with that, maybe what I will do is that I've come to the end of the segment, but perhaps maybe what I can do is you all can take a screenshot of this also. This is a screenshot of actually all the resources that we have available at MindStretcher. You will see interestingly there are quite a few what we call as AI tools and online apps. For example, we have things like AI oral read aloud tool. where you can actually, based on the link in a site, right, you can actually see for a certain reading passage what would be a way that it can be read, right? What would be the good practice on how to read that passage? And there also we will actually annotate, okay, so these are the good practices and everything. So it helps. So as the child listen to that, right, it's almost like a bit like an audio book like that. Then they can actually see, okay, what are the good ways, good practices? How do I read this? How do I pronounce this? So that's something that we make available there, amidst other stuff. So do check out this page. You all can just scan this and check on the link, and then you can get the resource from there. The other thing that I wanted to just highlight is this Telegram community. We have set this up to be open to anybody. So I have not even asked whether you are mass or non-mass students, because these communities are meant to be open to all, right? So we do recognize that, the education is a journey, right? And everybody needs support along the way. And, even as we help our own students, during our classes, we also know that that 2 hour class is not enough. So we try to support where we can, right, through these resources that we provide. And in fact, today's webinar is one part of that, right? That amongst many others that we do to really see what are the needs that students or parents have, and then we will bridge it, right? So sometimes we do general ones like this, and sometimes we also do a lot of subject specific ones. And for those of you with uh, older sons and daughters, you will also realize actually we have been doing a lot of this. So you all can also scan this. These are the Telegram chats where we will share a lot of resources. It's not just for primary 6 students or primary 5, it's for all levels. So we try to share things that are relevant there for everybody, and it's open to everyone, right? So that's also where we will share resources, share invites to all our webinars and different seminars, sometimes in person as well, right? So that you all can also come down and take a look at that, right? Okay. And yeah, so that's the key part. And finally, also just in case some of you were wondering about some of our programs, we have also started our AY 2026 registration now, for the new year, right? So I think some of the things that could be beneficial for you as you think about, let's say if you're busy at work, but you do want your sons and daughters to be, exposed to certain parts of this, to be taken care of in terms of the academic needs. Do feel free to scan this, and you can, take a look at some of our pre-primary programs and also some of our primary one related programs that would be helpful for the students too, right? And if you have any questions, you can also check in through our WhatsApp. So the WhatsApp number is over there, and then our colleagues will also be happy to help you further on that too. Okay, Ken? Yeah. So with that, right, I have come to the end of today's sharing. Sorry, I spilled over a little bit, because there were a number of things that I wanted to go through. But is there any questions from anybody, right? So just to see whether there's any final questions before we end off for today. So I just pause here a bit to see whether there's anything else. Okay. Anything? Okay, I don't see any other questions for now. So thanks very much everybody for joining in today. I hope that it has been helpful for you all in one manner or another. And as mentioned, do continue to follow us, right, for all the different webinars and seminars that we are doing. I do foresee that going forward we will be doing a lot more of this and making it available to everybody. Because we do want to help every student, every parent along the way. And we do see that it's not an easy journey, and we want to be here to support everybody every step of the way. Okay, Ken. And with that, thanks very much, everybody. Right, thank you for joining in, and we look forward to seeing you all sometime in the future too. Right, and best of luck to all of you as you help your child to adapt to the primary system too. Okay, thanks, and have a good weekend. Thank you, everybody.